Okay. Good afternoon, Riverland students, Comp 1, and little hello to my students up in Long Prairie Grey Eagle in that Comp 1 for college in the schools. Happy to see you today. It's a Tuesday for me. A little nicer day, a little warmer. And I'm trying to get this video done so it's waiting for you in the morning tomorrow, because we have class Monday, Wednesday, Friday, so to speak, quote, unquote, as we say. I think I got an okay gig planned for us today. Trying to keep them at about the half-hour mark. And I keep sniffling like that. I have three things for you in number. I'd like to put before you today a very different kind of poetry. I'm probably already mentioned that I'm always after the poetic feeling, right? And I'm trying to convince you that you should do the same. Seek it. And is the poetic feeling always available to us? Well, think about it a little bit. I suppose, as a quick example, just the human act of sitting and eating a sandwich. It doesn't seem very poetic to me, but if you time the eating of the sandwich with a beautiful sunset, well, right then and there you might have that feeling of poetry. And I never stop looking for it. I get up every day to seek it. And I got a little bit of a surprise today for you regarding what I would call poetry. You could shrug your shoulders and go, that ain't poetry, but I think it is. I've also got to do a little bit of a historical comment on kind of the history of prose style in America. And I might be simplifying a little bit, but just history-wise, there was a really big change in this country in terms of how we wanted to write and how we wanted to read. And it won't take me very long to talk about this. And I have a chance to talk about it later, because one of the writers that changed everything in this country, as far as I'm concerned, is a writer that we're going to be reading. And I wish I were at my blackboard right now. I could do my usual crap drawing of what it looked like when the boats came over here to dream this huge dream. But you'll just have to use your imagination. And then to finish with today, conclude, I'd like to head towards North Dakota, believe it or not. And when I say that, I'm thinking actually of a composition theorist named Francis Christensen. And I'm holding his slim little book that he wrote back in the 1960s called Notes Towards a New Rhetoric, 6 essays for teachers. So he didn't write this for students necessarily. He wrote this for people like me, people who are trying to teach English capably in this country. I love this little book. I'll talk about it later when we get there. And if I speak adequately about one of the essays in here, you spare you the trouble of reading it, all right? And let's just go to the top. And here's another strange thing to put before you. I'll hold it up in a minute. I'm realizing that at the age of 60, I'll be 61 in November, I can handle it. I've been learning how to do some different things in the country. And for instance, this fall, for the first time, because a friend taught me, I started picking and collecting chanterelle mushrooms. They're the color of egg yolks, and they're fantastic if you cook them well enough. And I spent some time doing that. It comes during mosquito season, so you got to get out there with your knife and your little basket and cut them. But man, I picked a ton of them, and they're dried and in the pantry, because it is the time of the year for provision. I've always been doing firewood, so that's nothing new. But 1 year ago, I've been thinking back fondly on the idea that I learned how to make sauerkraut 1 year ago. This is my personal sauerkraut. And how is it that it took all this time to get interested in making of it? I'm buying it in the store for my bratwurst. But the story is relatively simple, and we'll get to the poetic part of it here. I am missing greatly a ministry that my wife and I have done now for 4 years. I've mentioned it, visiting the elderly, shut-ins, people who are sick from our parish, nursing homes, assisted living. And I can't do it right now because I might, if I'm carrying the virus asymptomatically, I might get them sick. That's all. It's just big pause button on so many things in life. And I want to show you something that's just so cute right now and so poetic. And it doesn't really need much setup. Sometimes I find these people on my own, but most often it's my pastor, my priest, who says, okay, I need you to go see so-and-so. Go to this hospital room, go to this farm. And I've told you, I go in like I own those places now. Well, about a year ago, almost a year ago to this week, my priest, Father Gregory, asked my wife and I to go visit a guy named Al Fusi. Al Fusi, who you're going to meet in 2 seconds, is an old farmer. He's in his early 90s. And as you see him in this deal, he's got about 2 months to live. He's got stomach cancer, but he's still on his feet, man. And Al's thing for years has been growing cabbages. And not this fall, but last fall, Al, in the last weeks of his life, did his best, his level best, to sell 640 great big cabbages. He told the world that he wasn't going to die until he sold every last cabbage. And they were just huge. And we went and visited him, and I got a couple cabbages, and I needed to know how to do it. Well, he and his cute little wife schooled us on it. And if this isn't poetry, honestly, I do not know what is. Al Fusi and his wife, and I don't know her name. We'll just call her Mrs. Fusi.
No, narrow. Okay. Okay, so this is per each jar. Jar, yes.
You pack the jar up with chocolate. Not really stamp it, but just so it's packed.
Mm-hmm.
And then you put that on top of that.
Yeah.
And then when you got that up there, you stick a butter knife right to the bottom of that jar.
Yeah.
And you pour hot boiling water in there.
Okay. Use hard water.
We use hard water.
So like from my well water from outside. Ours is kind of rusty. Is that gonna be?
I bought distilled water.
Distilled water.
Yeah.
We never used
Or regular water. 'cause
we
ours
use
is
our regular
really
water,
rusty
and
too.
I don't give the recipe with running through a softener, you know.
Yeah, don't do a softener. Okay, so I should get some if ours is too rusty, get some distilled water and then do it boil that up. Okay. I am gonna do that.
You put a cap,
Seal.
a seal and a cover on there,
Yeah.
and set it on a cookie sheet.
Mm-hmm.
They might leak a little bit,
Okay.
and they should seal it. That's it.
Okay, so you don't have to re-boil it again.
No.
But should you put a
maybe
new?
3 weeks or so, you
3
can
weeks?
eat it.
Oh. So will it be? Do you have to put a fresh top on it though that will seal itself down? Okay. Okay.
But what was I going to say about that? I was going to say something about that. The reason why we put the knife in there is in my days I had the bottom fall out. Not somebody else told me they had that. Just too hot of a water, and the bottom fell out.
Wow.
So it's too cold there and
cold
too
there.
hot
Oh,
there.
so
and
it
you
spreads
take
it down a little.
the
Yeah.
bottom will pop.
Okay.
Now I ain't gonna say it all the time,
But you
but
pack it up,
we might do it. You know, it
Not just
hasn't
so
been
tight,
done.
it's real solid tight. You know what I mean? I know.
So do you shred yours or do you chop it up to make it?
Use a cabbage slicer. One
A
of them big.
cabbage slicer. I don't have that.
Yeah.
Does it make it into slices then? Is that what it does? So I could slice it with a knife.
Well,
Yeah.
I did
Do
it
you
with a
have
slicer.
one of those, like I have an old square, you know,
Mhm.
where you
Yes.
shred?
Yes.
That's what I used.
Okay.
It just took a while, but
Yeah, but that's
Yeah.
okay. Well, I'm making this.
How many years you guys been married?
40.
They're second marriage, though.
Okay.
Oh,
My
33
wife
for
died
us,
from
so
pancreatic
second.
cancer when she was 45, and her husband got killed with a tractor. So
Oh, okay. Then you met.
And we have 5.
we each got 5 kids. So
We each have 5 kids.
Oh, that's
Eight,
awesome.
eight boys and 2 girls. Yeah, she a daughter and I have a daughter.
What I love about that story is the idea that when he talked about how his wife's first husband died with a tractor, he doesn't need to give us any details. We just need to know that he died. I mean, it just says farm accident, right? And we are encouraged to enter into the white space, or not, and imagine how that man might have gone supernova. Quick historical observation regarding style. Style's the subject today. Style's going to be our subject for a while. It's relatively simple. When we came over here, right, to the biggest dream, to a country that resolved to be an empire. It makes me a little nervous to say that, but you don't often think of yourselves as living in an empire, makes us anxious because we know how empires go. They all end. Ask Rome. But the thing is this, when American writers started creating American literature, they had this tremendous felt sense, this obligation that they should imitate the style of the great European masters, right? And what they were imitating was the grand style. I'm putting before you now a tremendous tension that I find completely delightful. And that is the relationship and the tension between the grand style and the plain style. And how do you want your language to come at you? Do you want it grand? Do you want big long sentences? Do you want long complicated words? Or do you want it simple? Do you just want it plain? And I like both. There's times where I just love reading Shakespeare, and there's times where I just love to sit and read something simple. And I go back and forth. You don't have to choose. You can enjoy both. But here's what happened. And if you're doubting this, I'm going to spare you the examples. If you want to go back and read James Fenimore Cooper or Herman Melville's Moby Dick, which no one's read because it's an 800-page novel about the whaling industry, you're going to find the grand style. I mean, those guys were really, really going for it. Two writers came along and changed absolutely everything in this country. The first was Mark Twain, who decided just before the Civil War that he, more or less, the heck with the grand style. Mark Twain, formerly known as Samuel Clemens, resolved to write a book the way we talk, the way we speak. And he not only did that, but for the first time, he dreamed a narrator. We'll be talking about this when we get to reading issues. He dreamed a voice. The first book in the history of the United States, I think in the history of history, told by a 14-year-old boy. And that boy's name was Huckleberry Finn, is Huckleberry Finn. Huckleberry Finn, which was begun before the Civil War and finished after the Civil War, we'll be covering this later in the course, changed everything. And people were outraged by that book. The bad grammar, the crass, coarse language, it was banned immediately. And Mark Twain, the minute it was banned and censored, said this just guarantees it's going to sell 20,000 copies in the first printing. And he was right. This country has been fighting about that book ever since. It was kind of the 1-2 punch regarding at least the initial attacks on the grand style. Attack's not the right word. Phenomena. A second writer came along, and you're going to be dealing with him later. Your reading load has been light. That's going to change. Ernest Hemingway, who was a boy when Mark Twain died. Think of that. Twain came with Halley's Comet and left with Halley's Comet. It's like the comet brought him to Earth and took him hither. Ernest Hemingway came along with his clear line of running prose, and it pretty much changed everything. We loved him so much we called him Papa, because he freed us from the grand style. And whether you I don't know if Mark Twain has influenced you, but I can guarantee this. Even if you have not read one word of Ernest Hemingway, I can assure you that your life has been affected by him. And we've been going back and forth ever since. And there's writers out there trying to keep the grand style alive. I'm not sure how successful they're going to be. So we've learned how to make sauerkraut, and we've had a little bit of a history lesson. And we now need to talk about Francis Christensen and his notes towards a new rhetoric. And I'm learning how to put text on the screen, but I'm just not quite bothering to do that today. So let me use my crap paper cards if I could. They work. And I can't go totally digital, right? I got to be a little bit analog. Quick observation. Francis Christensen was a composition theorist. There was a time in my life where I thought I wanted to be one. I would be a composition theorist. It sounds, completely pompous, and that's the way my head was wired when I was a kid. Another editorial comment would be something that's always puzzled me. Why is it so seldom that great English teachers like Christensen produce literature? They almost never do. It just doesn't often happen. How can that be? He understood writing, how it worked. He proves it with these essays. But, historically, great English teachers, there's exceptions. Harold Bloom, although he didn't really produce literature, brilliant writer. But here's the primitive idea I have in my head. English teachers seldom produce much literature. And at the same time, great writers, when you bring them into a classroom, they suck at teaching. You think they'd be great at it. Well, they often aren't. I think there's some video out there of William Faulkner trying to teach at Oxford University in the South, southern part of the United States, and he was just sitting around talking about his novels. He wasn't teaching anyone anything. All right, we got to roll up our sleeves now. This is work. The essay that I want to concentrate on here is an essay called The Generative Rhetoric of the Sentence. And I'm not going to take you through every bit of it, and this is also not the last day that we're going to deal with this conceptually. But students have found this useful in the past. So here's a way of thinking about writing. Let me start with how I used to think about it, and I no longer do. I used to tell students, I hope I'm not repeating this idea. I used to say to students, hey, you know what, you should plan out your entire essay. You should plan out every sentence, every paragraph, and that's the way to do it. Think ahead. And I used to stand in classrooms when I was a boy teacher and say, you know, if you don't know where you're going, you're never going to get there. And students would look at me like I was a genius, like, whoa, that's so deep, Johnson. What a crap saying. I can't believe I got away with that. I should have been cuffed, tackled. I didn't know then that that's not how writing works. When a young person picks up a blank sheet of paper or approaches a blank screen, my analog always is the idea of heading up an alley, you know, kind of groping up an alley that you can't quite see your way down. Or to put it another way, you just head out, man. You just head out. You just start writing, and the writing generates itself. You discover your own knowledge, what you want to think, what you want to feel. You discover your own knowledge in the creation of a sentence, which leads to paragraphs, which leads to a text. I very rarely have seen students plan out anything. I started reading your most recent round of journal entries, which doesn't make any sense because there's a batch or two before that. But I wanted to just relax and read, 2 pages of whatever's in your head. And that's what I see. I see students, but there's some really good writers down in Riverland. I don't know what's going on. I'm not ready to quite tell my dean this yet, at least the dean in Brainerd. I'm going to probably whisper to my colleagues. It's like, you know what? Riverland writers, at least from this sampling, are significantly better writers than what I'm dealing with in Comp 1 and Brainerd. I hope my students never know that I said that. I should hide this on the internet. Wait, it's going to be on the internet. Anyway, clearing it away. That's what happens. And Christensen knows that. Sentences are generative in nature. And how many of you have I've seen this a billion times. You get to the end of a journal entry and somebody will say, gosh, I never planned to write about this at all. I'm amazed that I'm putting this down. Thanks for the opportunity to do this. And I say, you're welcome. In the margins, at least when I could get to the margins. Now, time to roll up your sleeves. Some of this is easy, some of it isn't. Francis Christensen has 4 rules for writers. You don't have to follow them. They're not really like precepts, like you got to do this. But we could call it 4 ways of thinking about writing. Rule number 1. Writing is a process of addition. To write, it's simple. This is the easiest one. You simply add one word to another. It's dead simple. This is where it gets a little bit harder. Writing involves control of the direction or modification of movement. This is a little bit crazier. Now, I'm just picking up a book right now, just because it was close to me. I picked up a book called Literature of the Gods. It can be any book, but think of it this way. When you pick up a book and read, your eyes go left to right. Your eyes go left to right across the paper. On the other side of the world, if it's Semitic, if it's Arabic, it starts on the bottom of the page and goes up. Imagine that. That's freaky. But not us. Here in the United States, if you're reading in English, you go left to right, left to right, left to right. When you get to the end of the sentence, you start over. That can deceive you into thinking that meaning only goes left to right. It doesn't. Writing can go in both directions. And I'm not going to go too heavily into this right now, but just with punctuation alone, you can change the direction of a thought. When you use a full colon, for instance, full colons are really powerful. You got to watch it. You can take out somebody's ancestral village with a full colon. You got to be careful. But one of the reasons they're so powerful is because colons throw the meaning forward in a sentence. Not too many people know this, that the dash actually throws the meaning back, right? So you can, yes, generally we're going left to right, but you can also go back, up, down. Let's get to the third rule. Christensen argues in his Generative Rhetoric of the Sentence that writing involves the control of abstraction. Now this is something that I take generally a lot more time trying to explain, but here's a way of thinking of it. When you make a sentence, you're filling slots. We've already talked about this. You're filling syntactic and semantic slots. Syntax is word order, semantics is word meaning. And every single word that you choose, you're making a choice. You're either moving towards the abstract or gearing it down to the concrete, right? And examples. Abstract words, examples would be freedom, love, justice, right? You can interrogate that. Justice for whom? Whose justice? Those are abstract words. Love, courage. Meanwhile, a concrete word, and I'll just look out my window and use words I love, Anglo-Saxon words like tree and stone, and can't see one right now, but I saw one this morning. Deer. That's an Anglo-Saxon word. Now this is what's nuts. I don't think we have two synonyms in English that mean the same thing. It's really tough to come up with. I have been defying classes in Brainerd for years. Come up with two synonyms right now that mean the same thing. And they stare at me and they go for it. I think the closest it's ever come was shrub and bush. The kid that came up with that, I've forgotten who it was even, but I went, wow, that right there, that's pretty darn close. But I still think I would go to Home Depot for a shrub, not a bush. But that was really pretty close. Another way of thinking of this, and I always start with like, okay, give me synonyms for cold. And well, pretty quickly we see students doing it. They'll go, okay, cold, frigid, freezing, chilly. And they can see that those words are falling somewhere along this continuum, this up and down line between abstract and concrete. It makes me a little nervous when we have law enforcement students in the room. We've got a big law enforcement program at CLC, and I think that's a hard thing to teach and study right now, given our days. But I'll say, okay, give me synonyms for law enforcement officer, and they just get going. Law enforcement officer, policeman, rent-a-cop, pig, fuzz, 5-0, popo. And I write them on the board, and pretty quickly they can see that it's really a true thing. We don't have a lot of synonyms that mean the same. You're making a choice. You're either moving up towards the abstract in the choice of any word, or gearing it down to the concrete. And you should know right now that language has limits, right? Addie Bundren in William Faulkner's As I Lay Dying at one point says, that's when I learned words don't mean what they're trying to say at. Something like that. And like you think that a word that you're choosing is signing and signifying what you want to say. The word is only taking a shot at it, because all words are metaphors. When the boys were little, I still tell them this and I still hug them, but when the boys were little, I would say, for instance, Jeffy, I love you, and I'd give them a hug. Well, really? Does that word love really communicate how I feel about that child? But you can't say, I'd die for you. I would go into a burning building to get you, right? You'd freak the kid out. So we just say, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you, and we keep going. But language, as much as I love it, as much as my life exists because of its possibilities, you can only take it so far. Robert Haas has a beautiful poem about that called The Problem of Describing Trees. Maybe I'll bring that next time. Last rule, we're almost done. Writing has texture. It's dead simple. Writing is texture. Writing can be loose or writing can be dense. Well, this is cotton, but the fabric of this sweater, it's kind of a summer sweater, it's not very dense, but the dense, I have some Pendletons upstairs where the wool is really dense. And we will re-pursue this when we start comparing the different prose styles of S. Scott Fitzgerald, Ernest Hemingway, and William Faulkner. Thanks for listening to me talk about sauerkraut, poetic moments, the history of prose style in America, and Francis Christensen. This book went out of print, and then the whole composition industry went, wait a minute, this dude's super important. And I know there's a new edition of it out, but this is an old one. Originally from Bethel College Library, McKinsey, Tennessee. Presented by Miss Dorothy Parnell, who I just Googled. Philanthropist. She lived 101 years in the southern part of the country. Hey, I'll see you next time all.